The thermometer outside the hunting lodge read -15 degrees, but Marcus Williams figured it had to be lying because it felt way colder than that. His breath came out in thick clouds that froze on his beard almost instantly, and the rifle in his hands was so cold the metal burned through his gloves. He'd been standing watch for 3 hours now, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, any shambling figure that didn't belong in the Colorado wilderness. The snow had started falling again around midnight, big fat flakes that would have been pretty in another life, back when the world still made sense and dead people stayed dead. Now those flakes just meant reduced visibility and covered tracks, which meant those things could get a whole lot closer before anyone spotted them coming. Behind him, the lodge creaked and groaned under the weight of ice and wind, and Marcus could hear someone moving around inside, probably Becca making her rounds to check on everyone. They'd been holed up here for almost 2 weeks now, ever since they fled Denver when the military's safe zone collapsed. That was the thing nobody talked about in those zombie movies they used to watch, the practical stuff that could kill you just as dead as the infected. You could barricade yourself in the best fortress in the world, but if you didn't have heat, food, and water, you were just picking a prettier coffin. The outbreak had hit in October, and by the time November rolled around, the power grid was gone, the gas stations were empty, and winter was coming down on them like a hammer. Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to keep the blood flowing in his legs. He'd wrapped his boots in plastic bags and duct tape to keep them waterproof, a trick his old man taught him back when they used to go hunting together. Funny how those memories kept coming back now, all the survival skills his dad insisted he learn even though Marcus had rolled his eyes and complained the whole time. If the old man had made it out of Phoenix, he was probably laughing his butt off somewhere, vindicated at last. But Phoenix was gone, just like Denver, just like pretty much every major city as far as anyone could tell. The radio had gone quiet 5 days ago, the last transmission some guys screaming about how the cold wasn't stopping them, how they just kept coming even when they froze solid, how they'd thaw out and start moving again. That part had really messed with everybody's head. Marcus had put down 3 walkers himself that were frozen stiff as boards, figured they were done for good, only to have Tyler drag him outside 2 days later to show him one of them twitching and crawling through the snow, half-thawed by some freak warm spell. The virus or whatever it was didn't care about temperature, didn't care about anything except spreading and feeding. The cold slowed them down for sure, made them brittle and clumsy, but it didn't stop them. Nothing stopped them except destroying the brain, and even that was getting harder to do when your hands were shaking from hypothermia and frostbite. The door behind Marcus creaked open and he spun around, rifle coming up before his brain caught up with his reflexes. Becca stood there with 2 steaming cups, her red hair tucked under a wool hat that made her look about 15 years old instead of 32. She held up one hand in mock surrender, grinning that crooked smile that somehow made everything seem slightly less terrible. "Don't shoot the coffee delivery girl," she said, her breath puffing out in white clouds. "That's like the #1 rule of the apocalypse." Marcus lowered the rifle and accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping both hands around it even though the heat made his frozen fingers ache. "Thought we were out of coffee," he said. "We are," Becca replied, leaning against the railing beside him. "This is some kind of weird herbal tea thing that Katie found in the kitchen. Tastes like hot grass clippings, but it's warm and that's what counts." He took a sip and immediately regretted it. She wasn't wrong about the grass clippings. "How's everyone holding up inside?" Becca's smile faded a little. "Jesse's cough is getting worse. Vanessa's trying to keep his fever down but we're running low on medicine. Harold's knee is swelling up again, and Derek's being Derek, which means he's sitting by the fire complaining about everything while the rest of us actually work." Marcus nodded slowly, processing the information. Jesse Martinez had been fighting that cough for 3 days now, and in this cold, with no real medical supplies, a chest infection could turn deadly real quick. They'd raided a pharmacy back in Silverthorne, but most of the good stuff was already gone, and what they did find had to be rationed carefully among 9 people. Well, 8 now. They didn't talk about Tommy anymore, about what happened when he went outside to check the generator and didn't come back. They'd found pieces of him the next morning, scattered in the snow like some kind of gruesome breadcrumb trail leading into the woods. "We need to make a supply run," Marcus said quietly. "We're burning through firewood faster than expected, and if Jesse needs antibiotics, we're not gonna find them sitting here." "There's a town about 8 miles east," Becca said, pulling out a wrinkled map from her jacket. "Place called Pinewood Ridge. Small, maybe a few hundred people before everything went south. Might still have some stores we can hit. 8 miles in the snow, with God knows how many of those things between here and there." Marcus shook his head. "That's a suicide run." "So is staying here and slowly starving to death," Becca countered. "We've got maybe 10 days of food left if we keep rationing, and that's being optimistic. The hunting's been terrible because every animal with half a brain headed to lower elevations before the snow got bad. We need supplies, Marcus, and we need them soon." He knew she was right, hated that she was right, but accepting it didn't make the decision any easier. Every time someone left the relative safety of the lodge, there was a chance they wouldn't come back. The walkers were one thing, slow and stupid and easy to avoid if you were careful, but the cold was indiscriminate. It didn't matter if you were smart or strong or prepared. If you stayed out too long, if you got wet, if you twisted an ankle and couldn't make it back before dark, the freezing temperatures would kill you just as thoroughly as any zombie bite. "We'll take Tyler and Vanessa," Marcus decided. 4 people, light and fast. Hit the town, grab what we can, and get back before sunset. We leave Derek here to watch the lodge with Harold and Katie. "Derek's gonna pitch a fit about being left behind," Becca said with a slight smirk. "Derek can pitch whatever he wants as long as he keeps the fire going and doesn't let anything inside," Marcus replied. "I'm not taking him out there when he can barely go 5 minutes without whining about something. We need people who can move quiet and follow orders." They spent the next hour planning the route, studying the map by lamplight and trying to figure out the safest path to Pinewood Ridge. The main highway was out, too exposed and likely to be packed with abandoned cars and wandering dead. Instead, they'd cut through the forest, following a service road that ran parallel to the valley. It would be harder going, but the trees would provide cover and break up the wind. If they moved fast and didn't run into trouble, they could make it to town by early afternoon, scavenge what they needed, and be back before dark. Marcus gathered everyone in the main room just after dawn, the fire crackling in the stone fireplace casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Tyler Davidson stood near the window, all 6 feet 4 inches of him packed into layers of hunting gear, his dark skin ashy from the dry cold. He'd played college football before the outbreak, and that size and strength had saved their butts more than once when they needed to move heavy obstacles or bash through a door. Vanessa Brooks sat on the couch beside Jesse, her nursing background making her the closest thing they had to a doctor. She was already in her outdoor gear, a compound bow slung across her back because gunshots attracted attention they couldn't afford. Katie Morgan, barely 21 and tough as nails despite her small frame, was feeding logs into the fire, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid. Harold Peterson, who had to be pushing 70 but refused to slow down, sat in his rocking chair with a shotgun across his lap, his weathered face impassive as Marcus laid out the plan. Derek Walsh sprawled in an armchair, his pudgy face already scrunched up in what Marcus recognized as his pre-complaint expression. "Before you start, Derek," "No, you're not coming," Marcus said flatly. "We need you here keeping things secure. That's not a demotion, it's a job, so do it." Derek's mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish before he apparently decided arguing wasn't worth the effort. Jesse tried to sit up straighter, clearly about to volunteer despite the rattle and cough that had kept him up all night, but Vanessa put a hand on his shoulder and pushed him gently back down. "You're staying put," she told him firmly. "I'll find you something for that cough, but right now you need to rest and keep warm." "Listen up," Marcus said, waiting until everyone's attention was on him. "We're going to Pinewood Ridge, and we're going to be smart about it. No heroes, no unnecessary risks. We get in, we get supplies, we get out. If we see a horde, we go around. If we run into trouble we can't handle, we retreat. Nobody dies for a can of beans, understood? Everyone nodded except Harold, who just grunted his acknowledgement while cleaning his shotgun with practiced efficiency. The old man had been a Marine back in Vietnam, and he approached the zombie apocalypse with the same gruff pragmatism he apparently approached everything else. Marcus appreciated that. They needed people who could keep their heads when everything went sideways. They left just after sunrise, when the temperature was still brutal, but at least they had daylight on their side. Marcus took point with his rifle, Becca and Vanessa flanking him with a bow and a crossbow respectively, and Tyler bringing up the rear with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. They'd learned early on that guns were for emergencies only. The noise carried too far and attracted too much attention. Better to stay quiet and stay alive. The forest was eerily beautiful in the morning light, every branch and pine needle coated in frost that sparkled like diamonds. Their breath steamed in the frigid air as they trudged through knee-deep snow, following the service road that was barely visible under the white blanket. Marcus's legs were already burning from the effort of high-stepping through the drifts, and they'd barely gone half a mile. 8 miles of this was going to be absolutely brutal. They'd been walking for maybe an hour when Tyler made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, their signal to freeze. Marcus stopped immediately, scanning the tree line for threats. At first, he didn't see anything, just more trees and snow and the gray sky overhead. Then movement caught his eye, maybe 50 yards to their left. A figure stumbled between the trees, jerky and uncoordinated in the way that marked it as definitely not human anymore. As Marcus watched, 2 more appeared behind it, all of them moving in roughly the same direction as the group. "They tracking us?" Becca whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus studied the walkers carefully. They didn't seem to have noticed the group yet, weren't showing the agitated behavior they displayed when they locked onto prey. More likely they were just wandering, following some phantom memory or random direction. The cold had done a number on these ones. Their skin was grayish-blue, frost coating their hair and clothes. One was missing part of its jaw, frozen solid so it couldn't even do the typical snapping and biting. They moved slowly, almost drunkenly, their frozen joints making them even more uncoordinated than usual. Just passing through, Marcus decided. We stay quiet, let them go by. Everybody down. They crouched in the snow behind a fallen log, barely breathing as the 3 walkers shambled past about 30 yards away. Marcus could hear them now, that awful gurgling moan they made, though the cold seemed to make it sound more like creaking ice than anything organic. One of them stopped suddenly, its head turning in their direction, and Marcus's hand tightened on his rifle. The walker stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, its clouded eyes scanning the forest. Marcus could see Vanessa out of the corner of his eye, her hand on a knife, ready to move if they were spotted. But whatever dying brain cell had prompted the walker to stop apparently gave up, and after another moment, it turned and continued following its companions into the trees. The group stayed frozen for another 5 minutes, waiting until the walkers were completely out of sight before cautiously rising and continuing their journey. "That was fun," Tyler muttered, brushing snow off his jacket. "Let's not do it again." They made better time after that, the adrenaline from the close call giving them energy to push harder. The service road wound through the valley, occasionally crossing frozen streams that they had to navigate carefully. One wrong step, one breakthrough into the icy water below, and you'd be hypothermic in minutes. Marcus tested each crossing first, distributing his weight across his walking stick before waving the others forward. Around midday, they stopped for a brief rest in a clearing, sharing energy bars that tasted like cardboard but provided necessary calories. Marcus's whole body ached from the cold and the exertion, and he could see the same exhaustion in the others' faces. Vanessa's lips had a bluish tinge despite the scarf wrapped around her face, and Becca couldn't seem to stop shivering even though they were all dressed as warmly as possible. "How much further?" Tyler asked, his voice muffled by the balaclava covering his face. Marcus checked the map, trying to orient himself based on the landmarks around them. "Maybe another hour and a half if the snow doesn't get worse. We should hit the outskirts of town right around 1 o'clock. And if the town's crawling with those things?" Vanessa asked the question they were all thinking. "Then we get creative," Marcus replied. "We've done this before. Distraction, hit and run, use the buildings for cover. The cold makes them slow and stupid. We're smarter and faster. We're also freezing our butts off," Becca added, "so let's find what we need and get home." Home. It was weird how quickly the hunting lodge had become that, how fast human beings adapted to new normal when the alternative was giving up. Marcus wondered sometimes if there were other survivors out there doing the same thing, huddled around fires in abandoned buildings, rationing supplies, and trying to outlast the nightmare. The radio silence suggested either there weren't many left, or they'd learned the same lesson Marcus's group had about broadcasting your location to anyone listening. They reached Pinewood Ridge just after 1 o'clock, approaching cautiously from the tree line above the town. What they saw wasn't encouraging. The small mountain town looked like a snapshot of the apocalypse, all Norman Rockwell Main Street charm transformed into something from a horror movie. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, some with doors hanging open, others crashed into storefronts or each other. Snow had drifted up against buildings and vehicles, and icicles hung from every surface like frozen teeth. And there were bodies. Not walkers, not yet moving anyway, but frozen corpses scattered throughout the streets. Some were clearly the result of the outbreak, showing the telltale signs of bites and violent death. Others looked like they just sat down in the snow and never got up again, victims of the cold rather than the virus. It was impossible to tell from this distance which ones might reanimate and which were truly dead, and Marcus didn't want to get close enough to find out. "I count maybe a dozen walkers," Tyler said quietly, using a pair of binoculars to scan the town. "Most of them are barely moving, frozen pretty solid. There's a grocery store on the main street, looks like the front window's smashed but the building's intact. Pharmacy next door, same deal. Gun store across the street," Becca added, pointing. "And that looks like a sporting goods place on the corner. If we're lucky, nobody cleaned those out yet." Marcus studied the layout, planning their route. "We split into 2 teams. Tyler and I will hit the grocery store and pharmacy. Becca, you and Vanessa take the sporting goods store and see what you can find. We meet back here in exactly 1 hour. If you're not back, we come looking, but we don't wait longer than that. It'll be getting dark and we need to be on the road before we lose the light." "What about the gun store?" Vanessa asked. "Too risky," Marcus decided. "It's right in the middle of Main Street with no cover. We'd be exposed on all sides. Let's grab what we can from the safer targets and get out." They moved down into the town in a loose formation, staying low and using the abandoned cars for cover. The snow had been both a blessing and a curse, muffling their footsteps but also making it harder to move quickly. Marcus led Tyler toward the grocery store, his rifle up and ready. A walker stood near the entrance, frozen in mid-step like some kind of grotesque statue. Its eyes tracked them as they approached, and its jaw worked soundlessly, but the rest of its body was locked solid in ice. Marcus gave it a wide berth anyway. He'd learned not to take chances. The grocery store was a disaster inside, shelves toppled and merchandise scattered everywhere. Most of the fresh food was long gone, rotted or eaten, but the frozen food section was ironically well preserved thanks to the cold. Marcus and Tyler worked quickly, filling their backpacks with anything non-perishable they could find. Canned goods, dried pasta, rice, a couple of jars of peanut butter that hadn't been looted. It wasn't much, maybe a week's worth of food if they rationed carefully, but it was better than nothing. The pharmacy next door had been hit harder. The drug cabinet was smashed open and mostly empty, but Vanessa had given them a list of specific medications to look for, and Tyler managed to find a bottle of antibiotics that had rolled under a display. Marcus grabbed bandages, antiseptic, painkillers, anything that might be useful. They were stuffing supplies into their bags when Marcus heard it, that distinctive moan that made his blood run cold. He turned to see a walker shambling around the corner of an aisle, moving faster than the frozen ones outside. This one must have been inside a building when it turned, protected from the worst of the cold. Its skin was pale and its eyes were milky white, but it moved with that terrible purpose that meant it had spotted prey. Behind it, two more appeared, drawn by whatever sound or scent had attracted the first. "Time to go," Marcus said calmly, slinging his pack over his shoulders. Tyler was already moving toward the back exit, but more moans echoed from that direction. They were boxed in, walkers approaching from both ends of the store. Marcus's mind raced through options. Shooting would bring every dead thing in town down on them, but they couldn't exactly fight their way through 3 walkers in close quarters without making noise. "The roof," Tyler said suddenly, pointing up at a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. "We go up, cross over to the next building, come down somewhere clear." It wasn't the worst plan Marcus had ever heard. He boosted Tyler up first, the big man's strength making it easy for him to pull himself through the hatch. Tyler then reached down and hauled Marcus up just as the lead walker rounded the corner, its hands grasping at empty air where Marcus's feet had been seconds before. They pulled the hatch closed and found themselves in a dim crawlspace between the ceiling and the roof, insulation and dust making it hard to breathe. "This is officially the worst place I've ever been," Tyler wheezed, crawling forward through the tight space. "Better than being lunch," Marcus replied, following him toward a patch of light that hopefully indicated another way down. They emerged onto the roof of the pharmacy, the cold wind hitting them like a physical blow after the stuffy crawlspace. From up here, Marcus could see more of the town, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The noise from the pharmacy had attracted attention all right. At least 20 walkers were converging on the main street, shambling and crawling through the snow. Some were frozen solid and barely moving, but others were mobile enough to be dangerous. In the distance, he could see Becca and Vanessa sprinting between buildings, a handful of walkers trailing behind them. "We need to help them," Marcus said, but even as he said it, he knew that was impossible. They were 3 buildings away with a street full of walkers between them. Any attempt to reach them would just get everyone killed. As if reading his mind, Tyler grabbed his arm. "They're heading for the edge of town. They'll make it to the tree line and lose them in the forest. We need to do the same, loop around and meet them at the rally point." Marcus hated it, but Tyler was right. Becca and Vanessa were smart and capable. They'd get out. He had to believe that. He and Tyler climbed down from the pharmacy roof using a drainage pipe, dropping the last 6 feet into deep snow that cushioned their landing but also slowed them down. A walker turned at the sound, its frozen face cracking as it opened its mouth to moan. Marcus was on it in 2 steps, driving his knife up through its jaw and into its brain. The body dropped like a puppet with cut strings. They ran then, really ran, legs pumping through the snow as they raced for the edge of town. Behind them, the moans grew louder as more walkers joined the chase. Marcus's lungs burned from the cold air, and his legs felt like lead weights, but fear and adrenaline kept him moving. Tyler was beside him, his longer legs eating up ground even in the deep snow. They crashed through a picket fence, scattered a family of frozen walkers that had been standing in a yard, and finally hit the tree line. Marcus risked a glance back and saw at least a dozen walkers pursuing them, strung out in a ragged line. The frozen ones were falling behind, but a few were keeping pace, close enough that Marcus could hear their individual moans and the snapping of frozen branches as they pushed through the forest. He and Tyler couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. They just had to trust that the cold would eventually sap what little energy the walkers had left. They ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, until the moans faded behind them and Marcus's legs finally gave out. He collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, every breath like inhaling knives. Tyler bent over with his hands on his knees, breathing hard but recovering faster thanks to his athlete's conditioning. "We lost them," Tyler finally managed to say between breaths. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. His face felt frozen, his beard solid with ice from his breath. His fingers and toes had gone numb, which was either a bad sign or his body shutting down non-essential systems to preserve core heat. They needed to get moving again soon, get back to the lodge before hypothermia set in, but first they had to meet up with Becca and Vanessa. It took them another 40 minutes of careful navigation to reach the rally point, a distinctive rock formation they'd marked on the way in. Marcus was beyond relieved to see Becca and Vanessa already there, both looking rough but alive. Becca had a nasty scratch on her cheek, and Vanessa was limping slightly, but they'd made it out with their packs full of supplies. "You guys okay?" Becca asked, her eyes scanning them for injuries. "Peachy," Tyler replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just got chased by half the town's population, had to do some parkour, the usual Tuesday afternoon stuff." "We got medicine," Marcus said, showing them the antibiotics. "Some food, medical supplies." "You?" Vanessa opened her pack to reveal camping stoves, fuel canisters, thermal blankets, and what looked like professional cold weather gear. Sporting goods store was practically untouched. I guess everyone was more focused on food and weapons. "We grabbed what we could carry. Then we call this a win and get home before we freeze to death out here," Marcus decided. The trip back to the lodge was brutal. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them exhausted and shaky. The temperature was dropping as afternoon faded toward evening, and the wind had picked up, driving snow into their faces and making every step a battle. Marcus focused on putting one foot in front of the other, following the trail they'd broken on the way out, now partially filled in by new snowfall. They were maybe 2 miles from the lodge when Vanessa went down, her bad ankle finally giving out completely. She tried to stand and couldn't, biting back a cry of pain that would have attracted any walkers in the area. Without hesitation, Tyler handed his pack to Becca and scooped Vanessa up in his arms like she weighed nothing, settling her across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. "I can walk," Vanessa protested weakly. "Sure you can," Tyler replied. "But we'll get home faster this way, and I need the workout anyway." They pushed on as darkness fell, using flashlights sparingly because the batteries wouldn't last forever. The forest at night was a different kind of terrifying, full of sounds that could be walkers or could be wind or could be wild animals desperate enough to attack humans. Marcus's trigger finger never left the guard of his rifle, and several times they stopped because they heard something that might have been movement, though nothing ever materialized from the shadows. The lodge appeared like a beacon in the darkness, its windows showing the warm glow of firelight. Marcus had never been so happy to see a building in his entire life. He gave their signal, a specific knock pattern on the door, and heard Derek scrambling to unbolt it from inside. They practically fell into the main room, the heat from the fireplace hitting them like a wall after hours in the freezing cold. Katie was there immediately with blankets and hot water, having kept it ready for their return. Harold sat in his chair, nodding his approval at seeing them all back alive. Jesse was asleep on the couch, looking slightly better than when they'd left. Derek hovered uselessly, asking questions that nobody had the energy to answer yet. "Everyone okay?" Katie asked, already examining Vanessa's ankle with practiced efficiency. "Define okay," Becca replied, but she was smiling. "We're alive, we got supplies, and we didn't lose anybody. That's pretty much a perfect day in the apocalypse." Marcus dropped his pack on the floor and moved to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth even though he knew it would hurt like hell when feeling returned to his fingers. He was right. Within minutes, his hands felt like they were being stabbed with 1,000 needles as circulation returned, but he didn't move away from the heat. Cold had been his enemy for too long today. They spent the next hour distributing supplies and telling the others about what they'd seen in town. Harold listened carefully to the description of the walker numbers and movements, his military mind probably already calculating threats and strategic considerations. Katie carefully inventoried the food, dividing it up to extend their rations as long as possible. Derek complained that they should have gotten more, which earned him glares from everyone else and a sharp rebuke from Harold to either help or shut up. Vanessa gave Jesse the antibiotics with strict instructions on dosage and rest, then let Katie wrap her ankle while trying not to show how much it hurt. Tyler sat by the fire, methodically cleaning and checking everyone's weapons like he did every night, a ritual that Marcus found oddly comforting. Becca caught Marcus's eye from across the room and gave him a small nod, acknowledgement of a job done and everyone brought home safe. That night, Marcus took the first watch again, standing at the window with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a cup of actual coffee that Katie had been hoarding for emergencies. She'd declared their successful return worth celebrating, and nobody argued. The storm had intensified, snow coming down so thick Marcus could barely see past the porch. Nothing would be moving out there tonight, not walkers, not animals, not anything with half a brain. He thought about what they'd accomplished today, the risks they'd taken and the close calls they'd survived. They'd bought themselves maybe another 2 weeks, possibly 3 if they were careful. Then they'd have to risk another supply run, or hunting, or something. The cycle would repeat until either they found a better situation or their luck ran out. It wasn't much of a future, but it was survival, and right now, that was enough. Behind him, Marcus could hear the soft sounds of the others settling in for the night. Jesse's cough had already improved slightly with the antibiotics, though it would take days before he was really better. Tyler was snoring softly from his bedroll by the fire, exhausted from carrying Vanessa the last few miles. Vanessa and Katie were talking quietly about inventory and rationing, their voices a gentle murmur that blended with the crackling fire. Harold was awake in his chair, always awake, standing guard in his own way even when he wasn't on watch. Derek had mercifully stopped complaining and gone to sleep. Becca came to stand beside Marcus at the window, 2 blankets wrapped around her like a cocoon. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there looking out at the storm. "You think we're gonna make it?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus considered the question carefully. A month ago, he would have said no. Hell, a week ago he would have said it was 50-50 at best. But today they'd gone into a town full of walkers, grabbed supplies, and all made it back alive. They'd worked as a team, trusted each other, and gotten the job done. "Yeah," he said, surprised to find he meant it. "Yeah, I think we're gonna make it. Maybe not comfortable, maybe not easy, but we'll survive. We're smart, we're tough, and we've got each other's backs." That's more than a lot of people had when this all started. Becca nodded slowly, then leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, human contact in a world that had become desperately short of it. Marcus didn't move, didn't say anything, just let her stand there and share the watch. The next few days settled into a routine. Jesse recovered slowly but steadily, the antibiotics doing their job. Vanessa's ankle healed enough for her to move around the lodge, though she stayed off it as much as possible. Tyler and Harold worked on winterizing the building better, stuffing cracks with cloth and newspaper, building shutters for the windows that could be closed at night to hold in heat. Katie and Becca managed the supplies with the precision of accountants, making sure nothing was wasted. Marcus and Derek, in a decision that surprised everyone including Marcus, found something like common ground when Derek revealed he'd been an engineer before the outbreak. Together they managed to get one of the lodge's solar panels working again, providing just enough power to charge batteries and run a small radio. It wasn't much, but it was progress, a tiny step back toward civilization. On the 4th night after the supply run, they were all gathered around the fire when the radio crackled to life. Everyone froze, staring at the device like it had just spoken in tongues. Static filled the air for a moment, then a voice, faint but definitely human, pushed through the interference. "Anyone out there? Fort Carson, survivors welcome, screening process, food and shelter, repeat, this is Fort Carson, Colorado." The message cut off, replaced by static again, but the damage was done. Hope, dangerous and seductive, had entered the room. Fort Carson was a military base south of Colorado Springs, maybe 150 miles away. In good conditions with a working vehicle, it would be a 3-hour drive. In current conditions, on foot, through snow and walker-infested territory, it might as well be on the moon. "We have to try," Katie said immediately, her young face bright with possibility. "A real base, with military protection and supplies. That's what we need." "It could be a trap," Harold countered, ever the pragmatist. "Or it could be real but overrun by the time we get there. Or we could die trying to reach it." We've got a good thing here. We're surviving. We're barely surviving, Derek argued, and for once Marcus had to agree with him. We're one bad supply run, one harsh storm, one serious injury from being done. If there's a real safe zone out there, we have to at least consider it. The debate raged for hours, everyone having opinions and concerns. Tyler pointed out they had no vehicle and no reliable way to travel that distance. Vanessa worried about making the journey with limited medical supplies. Becca questioned whether they could trust any broadcast after so many false promises from the government. Jesse, still weak from his illness, argued they should at least send a scouting party to investigate. Marcus listened to all of it, weighing options and probabilities. Part of him wanted to stay, to keep doing what they were doing because it was working. But another part, the part that remembered what real civilization felt like, wanted to believe there was something better out there than just surviving winter to winter. We put it to a vote, he finally said, cutting through the argument. Everyone gets a say. We're not a dictatorship. If the majority wants to try for Fort Carson, we plan a route and go. If not, we stay here and make this work. But we decide together, and once we decide, we commit. No second guessing, no division. We stay united or we're all dead anyway. The vote was close. Katie, Derek, and Jesse voted to go. Harold and Vanessa voted to stay. Tyler abstained, saying he'd follow whatever the group decided. That left it to Marcus and Becca. They looked at each other across the firelight, an entire conversation happening in that glance. I vote we go, Becca said quietly. Not right away, not in the middle of winter. But when spring comes, when travel is possible, we try for Fort Carson. We use the time between now and then to prepare, to gather supplies and get strong. We don't rush into it, but we give ourselves a goal, something to work toward besides just not dying. Marcus thought about it for a long moment. Thought about the risks and the rewards, about the people in this room who'd become his family, about the world that might exist beyond their little bubble of survival. I vote we go, he said finally. Becca's right. We prepare, we plan, and when the time is right, we move. But until then, we survive. We get through this winter, we stockpile everything we can, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Come spring, we make for Fort Carson and we find out if there's still something worth saving in this world. The decision made, the group's energy shifted. Suddenly they had a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. Harold, despite voting to stay, threw himself into planning the route with military precision. Katie and Vanessa started taking inventory of everything they'd need for the journey. Tyler began a fitness regimen, insisting everyone needed to be in the best shape possible for the trek. Derek actually made himself useful, using his engineering knowledge to design sleds for hauling supplies through snow. The next few weeks were hard but productive. They made 2 more supply runs to Pinewood Ridge, each one easier than the last as they learned the patterns of the walkers and the best routes in and out. They stockpiled food, fuel, weapons, and medicine. Marcus led hunting parties into the forest, and while game was scarce, they managed to bring down a few deer that provided much-needed fresh meat and materials for warmer clothes. Jesse recovered fully and took over watch duty, proving himself capable despite his earlier illness. Vanessa's ankle healed completely, and she started training with the crossbow until she could hit targets at 50 yards. Katie surprised everyone by turning out to be a natural scavenger, finding useful items in places everyone else had overlooked. Even Derek became less annoying, channeling his complaints into constructive criticism that actually improved their plans. Marcus watched the group transform from desperate survivors into something like a real team. They laughed together over dinner, shared stories from before the outbreak, and mourned the people they'd lost. They had disagreements and bad days, times when the cold and the hunger and the constant fear got to be too much. But they had each other, and they had hope, and somehow that made all the difference. One night in late January, Marcus stood at his usual spot by the window, watching snow fall in the moonlight. The thermometer still read temperatures that should have been deadly, and somewhere out there in the dark, he knew the walkers were still shambling around, frozen but not gone. The world was still ending, still dangerous, still nothing like it used to be. But inside the lodge, the fire was burning warm. His people were safe and fed. They had medicine and supplies and a plan for tomorrow. It wasn't the life he would have chosen, wasn't even close to what he'd lost when the outbreak started. But it was life, real and stubborn and refusing to give up. Becca joined him at the window, like she did most nights now, a routine they'd fallen into without ever discussing it. She handed him a cup of the terrible herbal tea, and he accepted it with a smile. "You think Fort Carson will be everything the broadcast promised?" she asked. "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "Nothing ever is. But maybe it'll be enough. Or maybe we'll get there and find out we didn't need saving after all, that we already figured out how to survive on our own." "That's pretty optimistic for you," Becca said with a grin. "Yeah, well, the apocalypse is changing me," Marcus replied. "Next thing you know, I'll be all sunshine and rainbows." "Please don't," Becca laughed. "I prefer you grumpy and suspicious. It's more reassuring." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall and listening to the sounds of their makeshift family settling in for the night. Outside, the world was frozen and dead and full of monsters. But inside, in that moment, they had warmth and safety and something that felt almost like peace. Marcus didn't know what the future held. Maybe Fort Carson would be their salvation, or maybe it would be another disappointment in a series of disappointments. Maybe they'd make it through the winter, or maybe tomorrow would bring some new disaster they couldn't overcome. The apocalypse didn't offer guarantees, didn't promise happy endings. But standing there in the firelight with his people around him, Marcus found he didn't need promises. He just needed today, and the strength to face tomorrow, and the stubborn human refusal to give up no matter how dark things got. They'd survived the outbreak, survived the cold, survived every horror the dead world had thrown at them. They'd keep surviving. Together. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, with grit and determination and the simple truth that some things, some people, were worth fighting for. The world might have lost its warmth, but humanity hadn't, not completely. Not as long as people like his group kept the fires burning, kept hoping, kept living. And in the frozen wasteland that used to be Colorado, in a hunting lodge that had become a fortress and a home, that was enough.